Hello, Calling Up community. I'm Claudia Alec, and I don't have time for this. I actually should be relaxing, listening to the impeachment hearings while I write up the amazing work that we've been doing for the past 2 weeks with the Every 28 Hours Plays engagement that we just did, and the sewing circle that we held in New York City for the Justice Quilt. Oh, and the all-day training, equity, diversity, and inclusion training that we did with the Theater Communications Group. Instead, we're going to be doing a quick reflection on Yellowface in Knoxville, Tennessee, because that's where we're going to be in a couple of weeks. Yay, Knoxville! Very excited to be supporting Carpetbag Theater's anniversary. So, Knoxville Opera is doing a production of Madame Butterfly. They've cast it with exclusively white actors and are doing Yellowface in this production. Now, the history of this isn't brand new to them. They were called out when they did blackface with Aida. And about, I want to say 9 years ago in 2010, they actually did a production of this same opera. It's a Puccini opera. They did it in 2010, and they cast an Asian actress as the lead. For this iteration, for this reproduction, they used imagery from that previous production to sell this one, which feels deeply unethical. It feels like, not only is it an unethical use of that Asian actress's body to give a false impression of Asian support for this production, but also it feels wrong to be giving the audience a false impression for what they're actually buying. They also created a video promoting the show that's full of stock imagery of Asian people. Highly problematic. Just, oh my gosh. It makes me think that possibly someone inside the institution recognized that using imagery of white people with Yellowface probably wasn't a good look and would not result in positive social repercussions for them. They would not profit from that. Therefore, they tried to sell authentic representation, but in fact, they were doing inauthentic representation. It's complicated. So reactions took place on social media. I'll leave links to articles that reflect on that below. They're in the middle of this situation, so I'm going to quickly reflect on the community response and what I see as a call down and not a call up. So this, of course, is now a national story, but it's also a big local story. So November 11th in 2019, Gabrielle Hayes in the local news, Channel 10 News, NBC, WBIR wrote this up. But this is the title of the article. Photos of Knoxville Opera actors draw controversy over representation. Controversy over what? Representation of what? I'm not sure. Let's read what the sentence is below to get more clarity. The photos made their way around social media and eventually led to a theater blog post asking for more representation. While some are offended, others say it's art. I'm 100% confused by the title and also the subtitle. Neither of these actually tell me what's going on. A more effective title would have been Knoxville Opera produces Yellowface and community responds with critique. Or is critiqued by the community. But let's keep going. Also, actually, while some are offended, some say it's art. I watched the entire video and read the entire article. They have nobody that they're quoting that is clearly saying that there are two sides. One side that's saying, well, it's not art and it's offensive and I'm offended. And the other side saying, well, it's art and therefore it can't be offensive. No one's saying that anywhere. No one's having that conversation. They're creating some kind of weird false equivalency that doesn't exist. No one is giving those opinions. And in fact, they've created an article that has nobody giving opinions about anything, really. So they reached out to Knoxville Opera, but they couldn't get anyone to be on record. They didn't reach out to anyone who actually did the calling out and the critiquing. They didn't reach out to anyone in the Asian community. They instead reached out and interviewed and centered local theater experts H. Caitlin Corbett and Tom Parkhill. They are both white. Tom Parkhill is the artistic director for the Tennessee Stage Company, and H. Caitlin Corbett is the associate producer for the Tennessee Stage Company. He says, it's something I think all groups struggle with these days. Really? I think that suggests that you have an implied bias, where when you say all, you're actually speaking about exclusively predominantly white institutions, because all institutions don't struggle with the choice between whether or not to replicate white supremacy culture by having misrepresentation through Yellowface. All companies don't struggle with that. Only some companies struggle with that particular thing. But let's keep going. And I should preface by saying I have no negative feelings towards Parkhill or Corbett at all, but I am reacting to the words that are in this article, and I might have a little heat about those. But I'm sure that these are two perfectly lovely human beings, and I don't think that this journalism institution set them up for success by asking them to weigh in on this in the way that they did. However, I do think that the way that they've weighed in is incredibly telling about this community and the politics of cultural production inside this community. So Corbett says, from a historical perspective, she believes it's important to look at the history of the arts as a whole to better understand where we've been so we know where to go in the future. I say no thank you to that. Oftentimes people would like for me to compare my current situation to the situation of my ancestors in the past, because isn't that a much easier conversation to go, hey, at least you're not a slave. Look at all the progress you've made. There's no need for you to treat your current circumstances as urgent or life-threatening right this minute, because they're not as bad as they used to be 200 years ago. How about instead we compare our current circumstances to how far they are from the ideal conditions of justice. So we're going to look at that. We're not going to look at the past, or at least I don't want to do that. But maybe that's not what Corbett was saying. So let's keep going. Some of the greatest art that we pay the most homage to is timeless because it was written a long time ago. And the casting and the practices when it was written are not the casting and the practices that would happen today, she said. Okay, I can agree with that, although I think it's missing a big thing in the middle of the sentence. So yes, many of the productions that we pay homage to, when the use of homage there is, I think she's saying, texts that we continue to honor by producing over and over again. They are timeless because they were written a long time ago, and also reproduced over time. And also, the black and brown and female voices that were also being produced at the same time, those were erased and suppressed. Those were not reproduced. So most of the texts that we absorb and think of as timeless are actually white male voices that were promoted over time. They're not necessarily timeless, but I get what she's saying, and I'm agreeing with it. They've been produced over time. And yes, a lot of the casting and the practices of the past, like, for instance, the practice of saying, hey, you're a woman, you're not allowed to even be in the theater. Or, hey, you're a black person, you're not allowed to even be in the theater. Those practices are practices we don't do anymore. Times have changed a little bit. Okay, so that's true, but what are we talking about here? Let's see, Corbett notes casting can be extremely difficult. That is a summation, a kind summation that I think is lacking a little bit. In the actual interview, the statement is suggesting that there are two separate goals. One goal is to cast for quality, to cast for talent, to cast for the ability to sing the notes, to act the role, to move in the way the role wants you to move. And then the other thing, again, this is all kind of suggested and implied in an awkward sentence, but then the other thing people can be thinking about or valuing is accurate representation. And so she's positing that those are two separate things. I would posit that they're the same thing. I would posit that if you have inaccurate misrepresentation, if the role has to be done in Yellowface, it's going to give me that nasty Yellowface experience the entire time I'm experiencing it. And so I don't care if you can hit the notes. It's also suggesting that there aren't actual Asian people who could hit the notes. Both are insulting assumptions. Both are inaccurate assumptions. It's not either or. It's just this. It's just us. It's just this. But ultimately, I am also suggesting that a lot of the past art that we've experienced has been bad art. It wasn't good. It was bad art because it had a bunch of misrepresentation in it. And art that has accurate representation is excellent, is badder. Okay, so there are people who can look at a representation of their culture and appreciate the homage, Homage again. Appreciate the homage that was attempted to be paid, she said. There are also people who are going to be upset because this homage paid to their culture was not fitting to their experience. Okay, I don't think that the word homage is being used correctly in this sentence, because if a white guy writes a misrepresentation of my community, and then a predominantly white company reproduces that misrepresenting story and content, and reproduces it with white bodies, so exclusively white people are profiting from this misrepresentation of my community, that's not paying homage to my identity or my community or my culture. That's actually insulting me. That's misrepresenting and insulting me. That's no homage. So again, I think it's a false equivalency where they're trying to create a world where it's like, well, sometimes, people can appreciate that people didn't mean to offend you, and then other times people are offended by the thing that's offensive to them. And I go, I don't understand how that makes sense. Okay, but let me just continue on. The rest of this is they both stress the importance of representation in all spaces, including the arts. So they're all saying like the basic things of, racism is wrong, equality is a thing that they would like to have in the world, and they think representation should be done across the board. Here's the thing, in the entire article, no one says the words yellowface. Nobody says yellowface. Nobody says white supremacy. Nobody says anti-racism. I'm confused. What is this article trying to talk about? Ultimately, this community has a choice. This is a community inflection point. A community institution was like, hey, we're going to do a huge public presentation of white supremacy culture. You now have the opportunity to co-sign that and say, this is acceptable, and we would like for you to continue to replicate this piece of white supremacy culture in our community over and over again. We want you to profit from that. Or the community can say, we do not want anyone profiting from white supremacy culture. We do not want anyone profiting from the misrepresentation of Asian people. This is not what our community is about. We don't want to support this. Currently, I feel like folks are trying to live in some kind of comfortable middle ground where they can say representation's important, but I'm not saying anything that would actually be explicitly against white supremacy culture, because I believe that this is necessary for my continued financial well-being. So I'm going to be like, hey, I'm not going to explicitly say I'm anti-racist, but representation's important. And I go, that's not enough. That's not enough. This article is not enough. This article, in fact, is a problem because it's stating the issue in coded language. They're using the word representation a lot. And I say, I actually think you need to use the word yellowface, because that's what's happening. And that's what's being called out here. You community, I can't wait for you to call it out. And I really hope that the Knoxville community has a juicy, productive, beautiful conversation where all of these amazing cultural leaders have a chance to have a conversation and really work out what is acceptable in their community.